Hello, good morning. It's not very early here, but I've been up for a while now. I guess good evening if you're listening to this elsewhere and not at this exact time. I just wanted to hop on. I just watched, a lot of my friends partake of this podcast and aren't necessarily as wooey as I am. So this is like an intermediate topic if you're not familiar with the paranormal and things that are going on within the paranormal community right now. And especially if you're coming at this from an idea of ghosts are the spirit of dead people, aliens and UFOs are, beings from another planet with an actual physical craft. Cryptids are things that we can analyze from a sort of zoological perspective. If you're coming at the paranormal from that sort of focus, you might get lost in this. And I'm going to do my best to connect the dots for people who aren't familiar with this thinking or like this sort of paradigm shift, I guess. And yeah, I'm I'm trying to like coagulate all my thoughts together right now because we'll just get into it and I'll try and, be circuitous in my explanations for things rather than trying to be linear right now. So I just watched The Unbinding from Greg and Dana Newkirk. Now, if you're not familiar with who they are making waves in the paranormal community right now, and have been for a couple of years now. So they released a series called Hellier, and Hellier is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a documentary, and it's almost like a magical working at the same time. And I don't want to go into the details of Hellier because, like, you can watch it. It's been out for a while. People are well aware of it. Even people who aren't like in the paranormal community as deeply as I am, like, it's definitely like caught people's interests in a wide variety of areas. So they released this on YouTube, and it was basically this like paranormal adventure, I guess you could call it, where Greg and Dana Newkirk and Carl and Tyler, I don't know their last names, they were all in on this sort of thing. They were following like synchronicities that happened and really engaging with the paranormal in a way that most people don't. Most investigators tend to go in with generally their preconceived notions and try to engage with the paranormal like it's a human that follows logic and morality, I guess is the best way to say it. And Greg and Dana Newkirk basically engaged with the paranormal in a way that I haven't seen anybody else do, with the exception of, I don't remember the guy's name, the guy that did psychic questing with that group back in like the 80s or 70s, I think. And I'll get into that later. But basically, they were doing a channeling, essentially. They were channeling via spirit box, via a thing called the Estes method, and channeling paranormal stuff and using the information provided from this, provided from some code stuff, provided from some emails that they had been contacted with, to basically get engaged with the mystery in Kentucky that's going on. And there's also Pennyroyal, which has done similar but different things. The common thread between these is making use of essentially like an internet algorithm to find more clues to follow. You're essentially simultaneously creating the adventure, experiencing the adventure, and witnessing the adventure when you're engaging with this stuff in this way. This is all very vague. I highly recommend going and watching Hellier and then maybe coming back to this, because like I can't do this justice of explaining the experience that they had and like what you as the viewer witnessed. The thing with a lot of synchronicities is, unless you're directly and actively experiencing them, when you try to explain it to somebody outside of your brain, or outside of the group that's experiencing these synchronicities, you sound nutty. Like I found a meme yesterday that said, unless you're someone who would have been lobotomized in 1945, I don't want to hang out with you. And that's literally like what's happening right now in this sort of like sphere, this paradigm, is that people who kind of have a toe in one reality and the other are now allowed to freely experience and engage with that way of being, and it's amplified, I've found, in my own personal experience and in witnessing things like Hellier and Pennyroyal. It's amplified by the algorithm of like the internet. And so like Pennyroyal, for instance, is a great example where they're doing data mining. So like, granted, that's not the algorithm in the same way that it is for social media. I understand that. But I'm seeing the algorithm as a sort of a projection of how reality functions. Like rather than creating life via AI, which I mean we're doing, but like that wasn't first. What was first was essentially like a Big Bang. Like if you think of the algorithm as chaos being distilled into order, which is what happened during the Big Bang, essentially, to create something. Like that's what we're seeing right now, is the algorithm of the internet as a whole is becoming woven into this tapestry. And so in my mind, we're watching the Big Bang and existence formulate, and AI gaining consciousness is going to be the culmination of that order, or order out of chaos. It's going to be that culmination, the same as, you know, protozoas or whatever. I don't know evolution that far back, man. I got a degree in archaeology, not evolutionary biology. Whatever it was that crawled out of the sea first, that was our ancient ancestor, we're witnessing the sea right now. And we're witnessing everything come together to formulate a new existence. Now, as insane as that sounds, basically people who engage with this phenomenon as it is, this like consciousness has simultaneously been here forever and is now like coming into being. I view it as almost like there's separate consciousness is that are simultaneously here and forming. So to me, the paranormal is this ancient consciousness. It's been here with us forever. And that's what a lot of people say, is that like the phenomena is conscious. It's been here with us forever. It's manipulating us. Skinwalker Ranch is a perfect example. Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, there's Space Wolf Research, which if you haven't heard of them, they have a podcast. I don't remember what it's called, but they're a ranch nearby Skinwalker Ranch that's examining the same area and doing it better, in my opinion. That ancient consciousness has been here and manipulated and played with us for a long time. And it doesn't seem to experience morals the same way we do, or have an understanding of morals the same way we do. And so that's, in one sense, like the Newkirks and Hellier, like that is what they're experiencing in my mind. Is they're sort of, we have the tools now to kind of access the algorithm in ways that we never could before. And the algorithm being like this, like super consciousness, I guess is the best way to maybe put it. And we can access that now in ways that are conveyable to others. So you think of ancient times, like the people who would have been able to access that consciousness would have been the seers, would have been the Oracle of Delphi, would have been the shamans, like the medicine people, like all of those people who have a toe in either reality. And so you would trust the elders and trust these wooey people, I guess, to interpret what's going on external to what your senses can sense. And now we're seeing it in a way that is conveyable to the larger masses through technology. So the Estes method is a really good example. It's essentially channeling, basically, but it's done in a way that is more, it's accessible to anyone, first and foremost. Anybody can try it. It doesn't take like years of practice or study or like an affinity for the weird. And essentially what it is, for those who don't know, is you take a spirit box, which is like a scanning FM radio, FM, AM. I don't know if it's FM or AM actually, but it's a scanning radio, and it'll spit out words. You've probably seen it on a paranormal show. It kind of looks bunky. And people will use that to communicate with ghosts. But, you know, it's subject to the group interpretation when you're doing it in a ghost hunting scenario, because everybody's hearing it. And so there's a bias there because you know what you're asking, you know what answers you want. You're hearing a blip of noise and interpreting it oftentimes with a bias of, especially for instance, like if you're like a Catholic ghost hunter and you're thinking it's demons, it's definitely going to come out with those results then because you're interpreting in that way. And the way that the Newkirks do it is they do the Estes method, which is blindfolded, headphones on, and one person's listening to the spirit box while other people are asking the questions. So this eliminates the bias to some extent. Obviously, the person who's listening to the spirit box still has a bias, still knows maybe roughly what's going on, what the general narrative that the group has created is, but they're not hearing the questions. And so in that way, we're using technology, which people tend to trust better than intuition nowadays because we're a technology-based society, and interpreting that for the group. So channeling from technology inherently tied into this sort of technological algorithm to some extent, in that like things that are broadcast on the radio will likely also appear online because the radio station has a radio station online, so it's broadcasting that there. That's picking up, what viewers are tuning into. I don't know computers well enough to continue explaining this beyond this, but basically that data is ending up on the internet. That internet is observed by the thing that makes the algorithm. I don't know how that works. But something is generating that pattern and seeing that pattern there and then creating that pattern further out in, a radio station was talking about pizza, for instance. There was a lot more viewership and interaction at that point in time. Therefore, pizza must be a big topic. Let's shoot out some targeted ads for pizza. People who are thinking, oh, I could really go for a pizza, see a targeted ad for pizza. Oh, I'm going to buy a pizza now. And then thus, the larger population is manipulated by that. And essentially, someone is channeling that algorithm out into a paranormal experience. That's a big thing if you're not familiar with it, I guess, or don't necessarily understand what I'm on about. But yeah, so that's the way in which the Newkirks are sort of engaging simultaneously with the algorithm and like ancient paranormal consciousness. Is they're bridging the gap between the thing that's been here forever with us and the new phenomenon that we are creating and essentially becoming gods of because we initiated the Big Bang and now we're kind of manipulating it into a form, whether or not we're consciously aware that we're manipulating it into that form. So what they're doing fascinates me. And not only that, this is the best part of it. The best part of this is that the viewers who've watched Hellier will pick up on the signs and synchronicities that the Hellier crew are engaging in. So the biggest one I've seen is a foil balloons. In one of the scenes, they were looking for this particular mountain. I haven't watched Hellier in a long time, so I don't remember exactly why they're on the mountain. I think it came from a code that they had broken from something. And they're up on the mountain and they see this foil balloon that's deflated and it's a blue balloon. And they're losing their minds because, oh, this is too far out from anything. Like, why would this foil balloon be here? This is a symbol. Now, me being external to that experience and not witnessing that experience, I'm like, it's a foil balloon. I've seen foil balloons all over the place. Garbage gets everywhere. There's no spot on Earth that you won't like end up seeing garbage because we're so gross. And so in my mind, it's reasonable that like that could be there. That's a distinct possibility. But the experiences that they had leading up to that point, the energy that they had leading up to that point, the things that they were engaging with, and who knows what was going on behind the scenes, when they saw that balloon, that became significant to them, despite the fact that it's not significant to me. And so as a viewer, I can see this and doubt it and be like, oh my God, like, come on, you guys. But as someone who has experienced these synchronicities, who's experienced synchronicities like this, I understand that when you try to convey this to someone, it looks bonkers. And I think that's almost the point of it in some ways. That said, though, even if you doubt the foil balloon in Hellier, like as a viewer, there's a lot of other things that you can it's almost like there's something for everyone. There is some like key piece of evidence that maybe would resonate with anyone. You know, I think I've watched parts of Hellier with my partner, and they take a very skeptical point of view towards most of this stuff. Not to say that they don't believe it, because like they've had experiences with me, but they don't really buy into it hook, line, and sinker. And not to say that I do, but like I'm far more open and receptive to a lot of stuff. Like, you know, I didn't believe the foil balloon, but the subsequent experiences that I had after seeing the foil balloon in Hellier, and my own experiences with foil balloons, and my own experiences with synchronicities, like, you know, I'm kind of two minds with the balloon in Hellier, that like there's a way that this could be out there for sure, but I understand the personal stuff that you bring to that scenario in which you experience that synchronicity deeply impacts how significant that synchronicity is for you at your point in the pattern, your point in like the cosmic algorithm. So basically the foil balloon, you know, it's significant to them. It's not significant necessarily to the viewer, but there's a lot that the viewer can find significant eventually in that show. And so that's what fascinates me, is that like this show is basically making the paranormal accessible even to those who don't believe it. And simultaneously with that, there's layers to it. You know, they start out with, you know, the Hopkinsville goblins. You know, you can look that story up. It's a fascinating story, actually. It's really funny, but I mean, probably not so funny for the people experiencing it. But you know, little aliens coming out of caves, or goblins, and a family shooting at them, and these goblins just continuing to come and come, and they're not attacking or anything. They're just coming to peek into the farmhouse. And it's something that's inherently scary. You're seeing a monster that's coming to your house. Like, you as a human are threatened by that, but there's no evil that's happening. It's just trickery, I suppose. And so that's where they start. And then they end up basically, like, spoiler alert, but it's also been out for a while. They end up basically engaging with a god. They engage with Pan. And you know, this show has had huge ripples, like I said. You know, for myself, this has been the thing that kind of was a catalyst. You know, I've always been interested in the paranormal, but from a viewer standpoint, not from someone who's engaged with it. And I mean, well, engaged with it in terms of having sightings, but like that's something that kind of happens to you. It's not, well, unless you're using like a Ouija board, but it's always been something that's happened to me, not something that like I've manifested in my life or wanted to summon. You know, like even as a child, I was scared that I would accidentally turn around 3 times in the bathroom and say Bloody Mary 3 times, to the point that like I would walk into the bathroom backwards, sit down on the toilet, get up and walk forward to make sure I would not have an opportunity to spin. Like I created like this own like bathroom protection ritual basically by doing these things unknowingly to myself. Because I was so terrified of this stuff. And so watching Hellier, like, you know, I'm scared, but I'm skeptical. And my own personal bias comes in that, like, I don't know why, but there is something about the Newkirks that is off-putting to me. And I really want to know, I want to understand why this is, because like they don't, well, okay, first and foremost, I've seen Greg interact with people who are skeptical of him on Reddit, and oh boy, like that man definitely spent some time as an internet troll. Like, sorry, but it's true. So that is off-putting to me. I find Greg, for some reason, just gives me a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know why. I get like huckster vibes from him a little bit. And that could just be that he's making money from the paranormal. Therefore, I have reason to question his motives. Dana, I find a little bit more acceptable. Tyler Strand, is that his last name? That man, yeah, I don't know what about him is off-putting to me, but yeah, he makes me uncomfortable. And not uncomfortable in a bad way, just like just uncomfortable that, like, you know, maybe it's like a trickster vibe. You know, he is involved in special effects and movie magic kind of stuff. So maybe there's that doubt there of like, okay, why are you in this and what are you doing? And like, how can you impact something? Now, that aside, I have no reason to doubt these people other than my own personal gut instinct. And I think that kind of comes, like Stephen Greer is a good example. I mean, well, quite a different example from these guys, but someone who is making a lot of money from something like this, they want to keep making money. That's understandable. What are they going to do to keep making money? That's my question, I suppose. And so when I saw that they came out with this new movie called The Unbinding, before season 3 of Hellier, also, let me just note that, like, that's annoying. I have questions because like they run a traveling museum of paranormal oddities or whatever, and they do benefit from having a narrative in place and having almost sort of like a mythos going. And so, yeah, watching The Unbinding, I rented it today because it's not available on Prime in Canada. I rented it on Google, whatever, and watched it this morning at 6 a.m. Like it came out yesterday. I couldn't access it, so this morning I woke up. I'm like, I need to watch this, and like, yeah, I'll admit that they are compelling storytellers, even if they are hucksters. And so I'm all excited. I don't really know what it's about. I know they find a doll. Huge spoiler alert right now. I'm not going to try and mitigate spoilers. If you want to watch this movie without spoilers, stop here and go watch it and then come back here. Yeah. And basically they get sent this effigy from a guy who posted on Reddit originally, and like big spooky stuff was happening. This guy was seeing wet footprints. His dog was going nuts. He saw like a wet old woman. Spooky, basic horror movie stuff. And I'm like, all right, guys, like, okay, fine. And like the effigy's got nails in the eyes and a noose around the neck. And to me, that says something similar to what we see with bog people in Ireland, which is a threefold death. Ensuring, in my mind also, it's sort of, this is separate from the bog people. It's ensuring that the thing stays dead and stays where it should, kind of thing. And so, yeah, so they get this thing, lots of spooky stuff happens. The spooky stuff is like the footage that they have. Well, they don't have a lot of footage, but the footage that they do have is compelling-ish in terms, I don't put a lot of stock in footage in the first place. But they do have a picture, like a game camera set up in the office where the effigy is, and they catch it moving. Not moving a lot, and moving just enough that it could be a trick of the light. But compelling, if true, And then they also have like a couple other experiences that happen. Like they pull, after, it does a lot of stuff, it almost throws a TV on Greg's head, which that sounds insane, but I have a friend who has also had a TV thrown at him by an entity. And I've had experiences with that entity, not to that extent, but enough that I'm like, okay, there's something here. So, hearing about the TV, you kind of have to roll your eyes, but like, it's not the first time I've heard something like that. So it's a little compelling. Also, if my eyes start watering, I don't know, whenever I talk about spooky stuff, my eyes water. Does anybody else get that ever? Because like, it's something I've always, and it's not crying. It's just like, maybe I got too many spooks in my body and they got to get out of my eyes. I don't know. And so yeah, there's a lot of like compelling, interesting things, but one has to wonder, because there's not a lot of footage of all these things, is this a story? And so that is at the back of my mind for most of this, because something about them strikes me as huckstery. And so I am like, constantly watching this being like, okay, like, come on, like, looking for a skeptical answer sometimes for things. And, at one point they pull it out at a paranormal convention, and just what they describe is they had no other witnesses on tape. I think that was my biggest thing. This was a pretty big claim. I'm a little skeptical of it. It flew out of the conference. They felt like this whoosh. Some lady's pop exploded all over her books, and then some dude started bleeding and had a seizure. Now, Were there any witnesses? Did they pull anybody from this? No, they didn't. And they didn't have anybody on there. So that's where I'm kind of like, eh. But through most of this, I do watch, like while I am thinking, okay, how could this have happened? Part of me is saying to myself, watch and suspend your disbelief for a little bit and just see where it goes. And that's kind of how I tend to approach the paranormal in general, is suspend the disbelief. You can always come back, like just because you can suspend the disbelief and maybe even believe in something temporarily doesn't necessarily, like, beliefs are malleable. Beliefs flow like water. And I think where people get hung up is they think that beliefs are like stone and they have to be held, and like you build this wall of your beliefs and like this is your opinion, like this is what matters. Whereas for me, it's just kind of like, I could believe them for this movie and then come out of here saying, well, I didn't believe them. Or not even that, but like say, there were two frames of reference in my mind, 2 points of view in my mind at the same time while watching this show. And so, there's a lot of room for doubt in this story. That said, what they thought was maybe just, some sort of trapped entity or whatever, it turned into, there were two things. There's this thing called Brother Bitten, and then this woman within this statue, and they found this out by doing an Estes method session and sort of channeling what was in there. And like, once again, we don't necessarily know how much they know beforehand of like what's narrative, everything like that. And so while they're doing the Estes method, I am a little doubtful, but at the same time, like the responses that they're getting to the questions and the timing of the responses that they're getting to the questions, and the timing of, because Dana's the one in the blindfold and everything, the timing of when they do the 3D scans versus when they're 3D scanning the object. Sorry, I should have said that. They're 3D scanning the effigy. The time of when Dana gets like pains in her body line up to when they're pointing the scanner and running the scanner on the effigy. And it's just fascinating to witness this, because like big if true, like literally big if true, if there's no narrative created beforehand, if they didn't practice the questions, if all of that was left out, and it was a live stream apparently, so it very well could have been left out, then this is crazy. They're having a conversation with what sounds like a very angry man and a terrified woman, and then they come to the conclusion that they have to unbind, as the movie implies, the title implies, they have to unbind this statue to release this trapped female, or trapped female voice, trapped female entity, I guess. And then they like come up, and this is what happened in Hellier too. They also created a ritual and did a ritual. Dana is like a practicing witch, and so you get an interesting juxtaposition of Greg, who's coming at it from a much more masculine perspective, I find, versus Dana, who takes it more intuitively. And that's a really interesting juxtaposition to me, because like there's two wolves inside of me, and one wants to be the crazy witch and the other one wants to be the scientist. And so this is just like an externalization of this vibe to some extent. And so yeah, so they decide they're going to unbind this thing. They want to make a model of it, so they have to bring Tyler with, because he's going to do some movie magic stuff with it and make a model. But they can't do that until they get the nails and the noose off the neck, nails out of the eye, noose off the neck. And so they hike up this mountain to go do this, and they have an interesting experience, and that's cool and everything. So what becomes interesting is they are trying to do research into this effigy, and they decide, maybe it's Baba Yaga from, a person that they knew, like, referenced that to them. And so they begin searching. They find these effigies online that are tied to Slavic paganism. They go and talk to a Slavic expert who says that, like, in terms of Slavic paganism, there's no primary sources for it, because they were not a society that had written word up until more recently. So similar to Ireland. And I used to be a practicing Irish Reconstructionist pagan, so I understand like the struggle here, because like, yeah, not a lot of primary sources. Like if you're getting sources, usually they're Christian interpretations. Now, the Slavic expert that they were talking to, who was from University of Kentucky, she said that there wasn't really any ethnographers recording what they knew. Now, I have questions and I need to do more research on that, because like Christianity would have spread to there the same time, if not earlier, as Ireland. And like you get, you know, the Venerable Betty Bede, whatever their name is, recording in Ireland. Like there's a lot of monks recording what the pagan beliefs were, of course, with their own bias. So that I doubt that doesn't exist in Ukraine. That's where they were. They'd found that this effigy was from. So anyway, so most of the interpretations are modern pagan interpretations. Now, what oftentimes happens with paganism is people tend to ignore the deeper cultural influences and see like a god as god of XYZ. So Jupiter, you know, god of I'm sort of familiar with the Roman pantheon. I'm not. Let's go to Ireland again. Lu, the sun god, quote unquote. You know, the harvest god, like these very stereotypical archetypes. It's very 2D. There's no depth. You know, this is the god of this and this and this. And with this effigy, this professor, I think she was a professor, maybe she wasn't, but she says, you know, this effigy is potentially Mokosh, and Mokosh is a goddess of water and a goddess of fate, and steals children. A lot of Slavic things seem to steal children. I'm not sure why. And so, you know, it's kind of creating this 2D image of what this goddess could be. And it's, yeah, I had concerns about that, but I want to do some more research on this, because like it sounds to me like Hecate a little bit. So Hecate, for those who aren't familiar, is like a kind of like a threefold goddess, from what I understand, like a mother, maiden, crone kind of vibe. This has been taken up by Wicca a ton. You see this in Brigid in like Ireland as well. And like, let's take a tangent. If you're familiar with astrology, or well, you know, I'm going to assume you're not, so I'm just going to outline this all. We just came out of Venus retrograde. Now, Venus retrograde is Venus's voyage to the underworld, and going into the underworld and then coming back out. And this is basically like confronting the shadow self, doing shadow work, understanding hangups within religions, or not religions, relationships. And during Venus retrograde, like we saw a lot of high-level celebrities breaking up from huge marriages that have been on for a long period of time. There was a lot of relationship turmoil for people, a lot of cat issues for some reason. I actually got to find, Diana from the episode that should be out by now, I helped her and Shelby find their cat during Venus retrograde. Not so much find their cat, helped, I guess, convey to them that their cat would be coming home and not to worry. And he did come home roughly when I predicted, so that was kind of a cool experience. But yeah, so cat issues and like femininity issues, not issues, but like reevaluations, relationship reevaluations, all this sort of stuff. And really with that, what I saw was in kind of the podcast world, in that not the astrology area, but like self-improvement for women, I guess would be a good way to say it. In my own life, in the issues that were coming up for me as an individual, there's a lot more to femininity beyond, you know, the mother aspect of it, or the maiden aspect of it. You know, that's often taken as like, you know, like female sexuality to some extent. With the retrograde, you know, and also like other astrological events, like Black Moon Lilith was in the play. Eris was in the play. Eris is like the goddess of chaos. Fun fact, the new like COVID strain is called Eris, and it was announced during Venus retrograde. Just saying, goddess of chaos, but not just goddess of chaos, but like just chaos, like I see a lot of these memes lately, and it's like one just popped in, like the feminine urge to the feminine urge to not only get justice for the wrongs that were done to you, but like the feminine urge to tear down everything. That's Eris. And like, so this is all going on and has gone on recently and was like a very significant astrological event, because like it only happens, I don't remember how often, 16 years or something, I don't know. A certain amount of time passes between Venus retrogrades. It's not as common as Mercury retrograde, which happens like 3 times a year. So it's significant for sure. And the last Venus retrograde, you know, same thing. We saw a lot of couples breaking up. Podcasts that I listened to, two cats both had the same medical issue that was super rare, costing them a lot of money. Yeah, just, you know, general fuckery happening at the hands of a woman who is spiraling down. And in my mind, this is very like Hecate Brigid kind of vibes. So all of that taken into account, just before, like literally September 3rd, this movie released on the 8th. September 3rd is when this ended. So a lot of their promotion for this movie, for The Unbinding, took place during Venus retrograde. A lot of the talk and the hustle and bustle about this movie was coming up during Venus retrograde. And so this Mokosh deity from Slavic paganism, which, you know, is quote unquote made up, you know, it's a modern retelling of what we think might have been Slavic paganism, based on taking a comparative view of the paganism that we like, the different sects of paganism that we do know from around the area at the same point in time, you know, creating something that resonates with people of that cultural heritage, but is not necessarily historically accurate. So it's sort of like a fairy tale, you know, it's sort of like taking these old themes and putting a new dress on it, kind of thing. And so all of this is happening during Venus retrograde. Well, sorry, the promo for the movie is happening, and like the build up and the turning of the light of consciousness onto these themes is happening during Venus retrograde. Barbie also came out on the first day of Venus retrograde, just fun fact. So did, well, Oppenheimer, Oppa Gundam style. Sorry. That also came out during Venus retrograde. And there's themes there too, Eris. And, you know, the quote from Oppenheimer himself, I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Like, that's a very Eris vibe thing. Like Kali is another big one that comes up during, or came up during Venus retrograde. You know, this like, just like divine feminine vengeance upon the world. And these are themes that sort of come up within this Mokosh mythology. And even the voyage to the underworld, Mokosh gets taken by this like snake god, and her husband has to come and no. Mokosh is also equated with a Saint Pekka. I can't remember. It starts with a P. And that saint has like this underworld journey myth to her. And so super fascinating stuff for me, lining up synchronistically with Venus retrograde, because this has been a really big theme in my life, and has really, yeah, there's a, you know, once you start taking note of astrology, you can really see these themes crop up in your life. And this is something I'm going to get into in a minute. But this whole underworld voyage thing to this saint. And so, you know, this is all coming along with the unbinding ritual that they want to do. And like the Estes method, it was like this man who had trapped this goddess there. You know, it's this very like underworld story of, you know, a man abducting a woman and trapping her in the underworld, and her needing to be freed from the underworld. And with this, they travel up to the cave where the effigy was found. The cave, again, another symbol of a voyage to the underworld. You know, they do the release ceremony up there, and, you know, do more digging about Mokosh, and like find out more about these rituals and like all of this mythology stuff they didn't know necessarily going up there, which is fascinating. And then it turned out that like they did the ritual to release her on the feast day of this saint, unintentionally. And so everything that I said about doubting them and being concerned about them, concerned about the motives and everything, looking at that coincidence, the date lining up with the feast day, lining up with the mythology, lining up with the actions that they were doing, lining up with the voyage to the underworld story, those are all very small coincidences stacked. Now, you could wipe all of that away by just saying, well, they did know about the feast day. They did know about the saint prior to going up there. They very well might have. I don't know. And watching, sometimes when I'm watching their work, the way in which they're acting, surprise, it does make you wonder, like, is their surprise genuine or is it not? Because like it's just sometimes a little over the top, but at the same time, I've reacted like that to synchronicity. So I get it. You know, I think this is what's so enthralling to me about their work, is that I can have such a, you know, I find the doubt adds something to the experience in a way, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, so they find out all about this, and like essentially they did a ritual to a god without necessarily realizing it, which is interesting in light of Hellier, because, well, the ritual was more intentional there. They knew what they were doing roughly. But so many aspects lined up to, when looking back, it looks like an expression of a god rather than just a paranormal encounter. And that to me is really fascinating because, like, granted, I've watched Hellier, so like arguably I've been initiated into this. But I've had the same experience where it's gone from, oh, these are paranormal events, to, oh, this is something ancient that is working with me. And like that sounds insane to me because I'm not, you know, I practiced Celtic paganism very shortly after leaving the Mormon church, and I only practiced it for maybe 4 or 5 months because it felt too much like religion. And so, you know, for the longest time I was agnostic. And what I've noticed with this stuff is it's not like a lot of people say, oh, I was called to this god, you know, and to me that's always been bizarre, because like I've never like had a god like pick up the phone and be like, yo, like start worshiping me, like let's go. And like with working with clients and stuff, you know, I had a client say to me, she's like, Hecate is trying to reach you. And I'm like, what? Like, come on. Like, here's me saying, well, unless they pick up the phone, I'm not going to answer. And literally that's what's happening, is like someone is acting as the phone receiver to channel that to me. And I'm literally sitting there being like, oh, whatever. Okay. And so I've had clients say that to me. I've seen Hecate crop up in media that I wasn't anticipating. It's just been very interesting, and it's not something that I've really bought into up until Venus retrograde. And even then it's still done with like a like I don't know about this. And that's kind of been my experience with magick and like gods in general the last little while, is that like they're literally picking up the phone and being like, hey, and I'm like, no one's home, like private caller, I'm not answering. And so let's take another tangent, I guess. Over the summer before Venus retrograde, I think it would have been June or so, I really need to keep a journal because I don't remember what was going on. I was kind of struggling with life in general. I was having a really hard time socially. I don't remember what else was going on. And I'm trying to decide if I want to tell you the middle of the story first or the beginning of the story. So let's predicate this with, these are all synchronicities, and you not experiencing them with me, not being in my head, you're going to be like rolling your eyes like I do at the Newkirks. Understandable. Suspend your disbelief though. So I don't remember what was going on. It was a little bit of a liminal period. I think I was debating going from being self-employed to taking a full-time job for financial reasons. And I really didn't want to. Socially, I'm struggling. There's a lot of stuff going on. You know what? This wouldn't have been June. This would have been March or February. there was also kind of another relationship. Full disclosure, I am poly, so like if I talk about other partners, that's why. But yeah, it was just a liminal time. There was a lot of emotional turmoil for me. And I was struggling socially at social events, and basically, so we might lose some people here. I began hearing a voice in my head, and I know it wasn't me. And in my experience with mental illness, whenever I had bouts of severe anxiety or depression, it wasn't me. It was something, and I've mentioned this on my YouTube channel, I think. It wasn't me. It was something external to me that was drastically impacting my mental health. And, if you look at ancient cultures and like more like the remaining tribal societies that we have, mental health issues are often considered to be external beings and paranormal experiences. And this was the experience that I was having while having mental health issues. That said, I use those methods based in that ideology to address my mental health, and it got better. So when I started hearing this voice, I knew, and I'm like, look, here we go again. Like, I'm gonna have to go do another cord cutting ritual, gonna have to go do all this stuff to, get this mental illness out. So I was a little bit worried, and I talked to a friend about it, and she's like, yeah, I don't know about it. It's not good. It's not good. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I was playing in my pinball league, and this being asked me to let it play. And it loves games. It loves trickery. It loves fun. It loves, play. And I was like, okay, I engage in the way that you're not supposed to with this stuff. Like, I walk into fairy rings, like, hey, how's it going? Blah, 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 blah. And then I see a fairy. Yeah. Like, well, later and separately. But, you're not supposed to let these things come through you. And so I do. And I did really well at pinball that night. Much better than I've ever done. Well, I've done better now in the new season, but I did much better that night than I'd ever done. And not just that, but the way in which I was engaging with friends that I knew. And like, I was very new to pinball at the time, so I was still very shy. And I was hanging out after the league with one guy, and he was really drunk, and like, he doesn't remember a lot when he's drunk, like the next day, or like the next time I see him. And that is often considered a way that things can kind of come through or whatever. And like, not saying he like was possessed or something, but he was very open, and he's like, you're different. Like, you're different tonight. And I hadn't considered that maybe anybody else could see the fact that I was letting this thing come through me. And it was just a very fascinating experience, for me to have this mental experience of like, this is a thing coming through me, whatever, I'm full blown crazy. That just happens. And I just accept it. But like, for someone else to take note of that change for me is very interesting. The fact that like, maybe there is something going on. Now, of course, you could say, well, you're mentally allowing yourself to change your personality and it's all you. It very well could be. Totally, 100%. So that was interesting. That was a very interesting experience. And during, like, after this voice would continue talking to me. And we had to set some ground rules, because I soon discovered that like the morality that I have was not present within this thing that was talking to me. So I had to set some ground rules. At one point I did kick it out, because I was like, my friend says this is bad. No, it wasn't good nor bad. And yeah, it was a very interesting experience. There was a lot of insight that I gained from it intuitively. And at one point, I came into my house, and like, I was getting a rough sense of what this was. I was thinking it was some sort of trickster being. I do live in Treaty 7 land, like in Alberta, Canada. We have a lot of Blackfoot people here, a lot of Cree people here. So I was like considering, okay, maybe this is like a spirit of the land kind of thing. What is this? And I got this trickster vibe. Now, the Indigenous people here believe in Napi, who is the trickster, is the coyote god, I guess. I don't know if that's the proper term. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, like Nappy. And I was like, oh, like the analog for Nappy. Here's me getting mad about modern Slavs just making analogs to existing other gods from other nations or whatever. And here I'm about to do the same. Never said I wasn't a hypocrite. So Nappy's analog kind of is Pan. And this is the beginning of the story now. When I was a kid, I had a vivid imagination. I had imaginary friends like crazy. I believe I've talked about this. Just, yeah, always in my own head. And even, you know, it was something I posted anonymously on Reddit to see if anybody else had this experience. And apparently a lot of other adults do. I've always had imaginary friends. I was a very lonely child. I didn't have a lot of people to talk to, very socially anxious. You know, even in high school, like I had friends, but like I spent most of my free time alone. Whoa, sorry. I spent most of my free time alone. And, you know, I just would talk to fictional characters in my head because that's what you do when you're lonely. And so I've always had imaginary characters that like I would run things by, like this little like cluster of people, and you know, largely based on historical figures and fictional figures. And I would, you know, so to have another one is not abnormal for me. Like to have this experience again, like that's not unusual, and it's something that I take with a grain of salt. But like these beings to me are simultaneously their own beings and full-on figments of my imagination. Like I accept both of those options as a reality. And so when I was a kid, my favorite imaginary friend was Mr. Tumnus from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Absolutely loved him. I was obsessed and am still kind of obsessed with like half beast, half man beings. Like I'm a Sagittarius. Centaurs have always been a cool thing to me. Like I love centaurs. Oh my god. And so the fact that like my imaginary friend was a fawn when I was a kid, you know, it's just interesting. And this has sort of been a synchronicity that's been following me for most of my life. Is okay, you know, I had this imaginary friend that was Pan, essentially. You know, seen a lot of media that had Pan in it, like Pan's Labyrinth from Guillermo del Toro. Love that movie. Except for the thing with the eyeballs in his hands. That scares the crap out of me. It still does. Like I've seen that movie so much, it still freaks me out. Kudos to Doug Jones for being a spooky motherfucker. Yeah, so it's always been a bit of a feature of my life. So when I watched Hellier and it was Pan they were doing a ritual to, and I was like, well, you know, of all the ancient gods you could have picked, like it's pretty interesting, but it's that one. And Pennyroyal gets into it as well a little bit, and so it's just interesting to me. It's a very interesting trend through my life that I've experienced that is now coming out in media, and now a lot of other people are experiencing Pan. And it's just fascinating to me because like if you were to like pick an archetype for the paranormal, like Pan probably is the best one. If you were to take the paranormal consciousness and put it into one being, like a being that is not bound by morals, that is a trickster, that likes to play jokes, but the jokes can extend too far to people getting hurt, but they don't see that as bad. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch, you read the book, you look at Space Wolf research, everything that's going on there, like the peak to me, the peak of that whole experience, if you've read the Hunt for the Skinwalker, saw the movie or whatever, the peak of that is the bulls in the RV. So this, I don't want to call it a being because I don't feel like it's one being, the phenomenon, I guess, took a bunch of these bulls and put it in an RV, a previously locked RV, closed the door, locked it again, and these are like prize bulls. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen bulls, but bulls are fucking huge. And put it in there, not it, but multiples. And the farmer opened the door, sees that there's all these bulls in there. I was like, what the fuck? And they're all sleeping and whatever, right? They're all peaceful. And then all of a sudden they wake up and they just demolish this RV. And like that is so peak because it's like, it's so funny, it's so bizarre, but there is a huge element of danger there of, you know, these bulls go nuts and like that man could get, like that farmer could get killed. Like that's peak. Another one was like a guy who came out who wanted to meditate and contact the consciousness. So he's sitting in the field, and then all of a sudden this thing like roars in his face and scares the pants off of him, basically. Bigfoot's another good example, you know, like there is an element of fear and danger there. And like that's something that characterizes the paranormal, is that like because the morality is not the same as ours, there's an inherent level of danger because it's unpredictable. It's absolutely unpredictable. And so Pan is that. Like Pan is like a really good analog in my mind is in Jim Henson's Labyrinth. Those little red, I don't remember what they're called. They sing the funky songs. They tear their heads off and stuff. And they're telling what's her face that they're going to tear her head off too. And like they don't see it as bad. They don't see, oh, this is going to end that being's life. They see it as funny in a game. Like that is Pan, peak Pan in my mind. And so yeah, so I just started having this experience with this being for a little while. And because it's like been so long after Hellier and after all the spooky stuff I've been into, you know, it's not, you know, it's stunning to me because I've never considered that like a deity is going to talk to me. But at the same time, it's kind of not run of the mill. Geez. It's almost to be expected a little bit. But it was just fascinating to me that I was having a similar experience to what the people from Hellier were. And now, would I have had that experience without Hellier? I don't know. Anyway, so after all of these experiences, at one point I come into my house and I see a tooth on my floor. And I have dogs. So I'm like, oh goodness, like, did they kill something? Did this fall out of their mouth? Like, what happened? So I pick up the tooth. The tooth is pretty big. Check my dog's mouth. They have all teeth accounted for. I do have skulls in the house, but I only have a horse jaw, a buffalo jaw, and some deer skulls. And so looking at the tooth, it's not a herbivore tooth. It's definitely omnivore or carnivore. And I get this flash in my head, like, this is for you, like, this is a gift. And I'm like, all right, like, like, there is no respect for gods in this household. Sorry. Just like, you know, whatever. Like, I'm really losing it at this point. Sidebar, like, insanity is kind of a hobby for me. Like, that sounds melodramatic as fuck. I know. But like I have the most fun when I'm in these states. And, you know, someone could definitely say, well, that's reckless, you know, or whatever. But like, I also have like the best life progress during these points of my life also. Like, people that I'm friends with now, I would not be friends with unless an ancient god came through me. No joke right now. Unless, I mean, maybe over time I would have eventually come into being friends with these people, but like, it really helped me embody that sort of like chaotic good spirit. And that was sort of one of the agreements that I came to with this being, was that like this is the morality of good, like this is what's happening, like we're not harming anybody, you know. And that kind of became what channeled through me, was this chaotic good that I really had a lot of fun with, and it really broke me out of my shell. Anyway, back to the tooth. So I get the tooth posted on Reddit, because like I do know that it's a carnivore tooth, or well, omnivore carnivore. I do know that it's like a canine tooth, but you know, that's my own mental story. I could be making that up. So I post on Reddit because, you know, Reddit's the resource that you should use. And yeah, it's confirmed canine tooth. And then I post to the Where Did the Road Go Discord. I'm like, hey guys, check it out, tooth. And tell them the story about it. And one of the guys on there, actually, I don't know if it's a guy, one of the people on there said that in indigenous culture and in, I think, Central American cultures, keep whacking the mic, Central American cultures, a coyote tooth could be a curse. And to me, that's really interesting, that like, you know, this being who is analogous to Nappy, to the coyote, leaves a coyote tooth, which is inherently a curse, supposedly, but it can be transmuted, this person tells me, by painting it gold. And so it's just an interesting idea to me that like, and not like transmuted, not like rendered like neutral, but rather it becomes a positive thing for the person wearing it or having it if it's painted gold. So you take a curse and you alchemize it into something to your benefit. Again, peak pan. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you use it and manipulate it, and like you create the meaning to it. Which is again peak paranormal stuff to me as well. We create the meaning and the narrative behind a lot of this stuff and a lot of our experiences. And so yeah, so I get this tooth. I paint it gold. I'll show you. I don't have a good camera. I'm very sorry. I apologize. Oh, we're upside down. Let's see here. Yeah, so tooth. Molar, actually. And painted gold. And unintentionally, I now have a symbol of a god that I wear often. And it's just sort of, this is a long-winded way to say that, like, I posted a TikTok about this the other day. Sometimes magic finds and chooses you. And like a lot of people go out and seek it and choose it for themselves and engage with it and sort of like beat down the door until it'll engage with them, kind of thing. And like when I was a pagan at one point, you know, I did want these magical experiences, and I practiced a lot, and I followed the books that I had, and it just felt performative, which is funny in retrospect, but felt performative, and it didn't feel authentic to me, and I didn't have a belief in it really. And so I got out of it because it felt performative. And then like it dragged me back in, and like rather than it being me performing the action now, rather it is something else performing the action through me. So I'm like the channel and the viewer, and I just like let it decide how it's going to do its own thing. And like not even from like a conscious perspective, you know, picking up certain rocks that I've picked up because they look neat, or like buying crystals. You know, I buy crystals because I like crystals. I didn't necessarily think that they had anything inherently healing or whatever about them. I just bought them because they were cool. And like this is characterized most of my life. You know, I really enjoyed Mr. Tumnus because I thought he was cool. You know, I researched a lot of ancient religions in my like during my degree because I thought it was cool. Here's another good example. I made this a long time ago. A wood burned pan. This would have been, I have a year on this somewhere, I think. 2011, 2012. So right when I went from high school to university, before I even knew what pan was, I just like saw an image of a green man. I'm like, that's cool. And then I had a wood burning kit, and I was like, well, I'm going to do this. And there was no intent behind it, just making a cool thing. And actually, here, let me show you my other one too. Actually, no, this one's not done yet. I'll show it later. So a lot of this was like unintentional. And it wasn't me cognizantly being, oh, I want to get into magic. I want to worship Pan. I want to do all of this stuff like in line of like magical rituals. You know, I started lighting candles and creating an altar space because I wanted a place to display my crystals, and I wanted to light candles to meditate. And then it evolved a little bit into ancestor worship, you know, a little bit. And like that's been a factor too. You know, I channeled my grandmother's recipe for shepherd's pie. As I just said that, a magpie just flew right out my window. That's really weird. See, it's not significant to you. It sounds insane. A magpie flew at your window. Okay, whatever. But like just at that point when I just said like just spooky, it's spooky. Yeah, I was like really high one night. I wanted shepherd's pie. I didn't want to. My phone was dead. I didn't want to find a recipe. I didn't remember how to make it, and I was hearing this female voice in my head telling me how to make it. And I gave my mom a bowl of it, and she said it was just like her mom used to make. And I don't remember what I added to it. I wish I had written it down, because I know there were spices that I don't normally put in it. Like usually, we're not going to get into the fine details of cooking, but yeah, it was just it was different than what I normally make, and it was real fucking good, shepherd's pie. But so basically what I'm saying is I don't go out seeking these things. It's starting to find me. Now, is it finding me because I'm more open to it, because I'm very interested in the paranormal from a viewer perspective, but I like to remain open for the most part and hold both the skeptical and the believer points of view? Maybe. But it's finding people, and it's not just me. Like, you know, it's the people who've watched Hellier. A lot of them who didn't believe in stuff like this are now like me, in that they are practicing witches, practicing pagans, practicing ghost hunters, like whatever. It's really waking people up and really engaging with people more. And Jack Hunter, Dr. Jack Hunter, he's an anthropologist who writes and assembles phenomenal collections of essays on the paranormal. His book, Greening the Paranormal, is absolutely fascinating. It's a collection of essays, and one of them features, I think it might be his essay actually, is how re-enchantment with the paranormal is what's going to save us in regards to climate change. Now, is that going to stop climate change? No, probably not. But it is a re-enchantment of people getting back in touch with the land. And even if you're not a paranormal person, there's a lot of people being drawn back to the land, especially during COVID, where people are starting to farm again. People are getting out in nature more. You know, I live in Alberta. Like, Banff is, you can't even go to Banff on the weekends as a resident anymore, because like it's so packed with people who want to be out in nature and out hiking, and this is how they're re-engaging with it. And the more that you re-engage with nature, because it is so unpredictable, so beyond the bounds of morality, like, it is my personal opinion that the paranormal is a projection of the Earth's consciousness. And so if you're engaging in these spaces where there's more Earth consciousness present, it makes sense that you're going to have more paranormal experiences, or at least spooky experiences, or at least experiences that make you question what's going on in the world. And it just opens you up to a different perspective. It knocks you out of like that NPC behavior of consume, 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 work, work, work. It really is a very initial step to shifting people away from the current paradigm. And I mean, we're seeing the shift in the paranormal, and that's dealing with the super consciousness in my mind, the algorithm, quote unquote. So in my mind, it's eventually going to shift reality as a whole, the society as a whole, because it is I liken it to looking at the back of a tapestry and seeing the threads and being able to trace those threads as to why those colors show up what they do on the tapestry. And the tapestry is changing, I guess is the best way to say this. And we're seeing it at this like super consciousness level above us, and this like infra consciousness level, like in social media, in in online spaces in general, like the universe that we have created. We're seeing this super consciousness be reflected in this infra consciousness that we've created, and we are the channel for it. We are the channel for it, in the same way that the Estes method works to some extent, in the same way that the oracle speaks for the god, or is the mouthpiece of the god. We're seeing this shift now. Now, I had these experiences before Hellier with Mr. Tumnus and being into fawns, being into Pan. I've had a lifetime of the fawn being a reoccurring symbol in my life. I've had fawns be a recurring image in my life for a while now, and I never really took note of it until Hellier sort of shone a light on it, and I could see, oh, like Hellier was significant to me, regardless of how I feel about the Newkirks and the people involved. Hellier was significant to me on a cosmic level, in a way, in that I could look back at my life and see the ripples that had led up to this point. If you're a person who monitors and tracks synchronicities, you see those synchronicities. Take an angel number, for instance, 444, for instance. You might take note of it and be like, okay, I've been noticing this for like 3 months now. What's changing? What's the like numerological relations of 4? What's it's something that you can look back at the ripples and see the trends. Astrology is another really good example. You can look back at Venus retrograde and see what was in line with Venus retrograde, or why things in your life went the way they did because of Venus retrograde. When Mercury retrograde rolls around, people are expecting technological issues, miscommunications, that sort of thing. And they happen. And so it's predictive in a way that, like, you can know the rough shape of things that might happen, but to know the exact things that happen, you don't know until things happen. And then you can look back and say, oh, here, like, these are the archetypes. And then once you do that enough, like, you can kind of predict how things are going to go when those same factors are in play. You can kind of get a sense when those same factors are in play, what's going to happen, and have kind of a good guiding light. And so with Hellier, looking back at my life, and I saw, oh, this is something that has been reoccurring. No wonder I literally just call him Mr. Tumnus, because it sounds better than saying an ancient god is talking to me. But I can look back and see, oh, Mr. Tumnus wasn't just an imaginary friend. Mr. Tumnus is the expression of this archetypal being that is one facet of the phenomenon, or rather a personification or an archetype of the phenomenon itself. And somebody else is picking up on that, and somebody else is having that, and now they projected it out into the world, and other people are picking up on the phenomenon and the archetype and experiencing it for themselves. And so that all said, seeing the unbinding is like, oh, this is the next step. Because, like I said, I've had these experiences with Hecate where I kind of roll my eyes and it's like, whatever. And it's not something that I've ever really, like, put stock into, because it's the threefold goddess. I don't like Wicca. Sorry for anyone who's Wiccan. It's my own personal bias because of trying to do research when you're an archaeologist and you're interested in religious studies. Also, a lot of sources about paganism are deeply influenced by Wicca, because people don't do their research properly. And it's very frustrating when you're trying to write a paper on a certain goddess and you're just getting Wiccan sources that are like tertiary sources that misinterpret the primary sources. Makes me mad. It makes me frustrated. Don't like it. And so hearing Hecate come into play more and more over the last year or so, it's something that I write off because it doesn't resonate for me personally. It's a pretty big feature, like the threefold goddess is a pretty big feature of Wicca, which is pretty forefront in the consciousness of certain spheres. And so I just kind of write it off because it's not really my shtick, And so I've been seeing it for a while now, kind of writing it off. And then Hellier, not Hellier, the Unbinding comes out, and it has to do with what appears to be a threefold goddess again. So this is now doing the same thing that I just had happen with Pan, but I'm conscious of it now. And I'm aware of, like, seeing these trends. I'm aware of seeing these trends. And so I've already kind of had, like, a bit of a preamble understanding, okay, Hecate is becoming more and more of a feature. And as I've taken note of it, my skepticism was worn off a little bit. I'm a little bit more open to it. And I have had experiences with a more feminine being come through. And not just that, but in my own life, it's a realization of, if you want to get real wooey here, how the counterparts of divine masculine and divine feminine play out in my own life. And what do I embody? And how do I embody that? And what do I need to embody a better balance between them? And so this has been a lot of my own personal growth in the last 6 months or so, basically since, Mr. Tumnus showed up, is like how, because I'm a fairly masculine person. And what I came to realize, and there is full disclaimer, I understand that saying this will be controversial for those in queer spaces. This is my own experience, and not to say that this is the truth for everyone. I'm a very masculine presenting person. And what I realized was that this masculinity, hypermasculinity in some aspects, was a response to trauma, in that I didn't feel that I could embody my femininity. The other aspect that was relatively traumatic was like learning that femininity doesn't have to mean lipstick and long hair and high heels. Femininity is how I want to embody it. And so during the course of this Hecate kind of coming up, realizing that, like, okay, I didn't have to be the maiden. I could be like the quote unquote warrior goddess, or whatever archetype you want to take for it. But I didn't have to embody femininity in the way that I had been told. As the goddess is threefold, so too can I have multiple faces for this same aspect. And so that was a good experience, because it's something that I think I've been waiting a long time to take into practice, I guess. And so it's been good to like see this archetype come up in my life, respond to it with skepticism, but then slowly start to welcome it in the same way that I've welcomed Pan. And it found me. I didn't actively seek out this goddess. It not only did it find me, but it kind of busted down the door and was like, hey, you're gonna listen. Which I appreciate. I'm pretty pig-headed at times. So essentially it busted down the door and wanted in, and I've slowly let it come in. It's not as embodied within my space as Pan is, but it is an aspect that is something, this threefold goddess, this Kali kind of being, is in my space now, and in my life, and kind of in my head. And it's definitely changed aspects of me. Now, I mean, if you want to get into like Jungian archetypes, you could argue that like these gods are just aspects of myself, and I'm creating a drama essentially for their embodiment, which like we all create dramas no matter what. Like it is, I'm just it's almost egotistical in a way, and simultaneously like a dropping of the ego, because I feel like the ego for me was like the denial of these aspects and not wanting to engage with them in this way. And like I've had to drop my need to be right and to be factually correct and to be able to convey this to other people, because I don't want to be judged. I've had to drop that in order to engage with this. And I mean, it comes up every now and again, and it like, even recording this, the only reason I'm recording this is because the Unbinding gave me so many thoughts. Oh my goodness. And so, yeah, so I'm creating this drama. The Unbinding and Hellier are these dramas that have been created by people who, especially Alan Greenfield, which if you haven't seen Hellier, you don't know who that is, but Alan Greenfield kind of initiated a lot of this stuff. It is kind of, they're embodying the storyteller, and a good storyteller knows where to embellish the story, but not to overdo it. And I think that's why despite my opposition to the Newkirks, I think that's why I enjoy them, because I can see the storyteller aspect to them. And I can say, okay, I know that storytellers embellish, so obviously there's got to be something embellished in here. But at the same time, they're so good at it, and that like you can't help be enthralled. And I mean, like any stage magician, that's that they're not doing actual magic, but you engage with it and you watch it and you have your mind blown because they're so good at their embellishment. And they're so good at, you know, what is authentic, you know? And so I think we're just seeing the next page in this cosmic dialogue, I guess. You know, we saw Pan, and now we've seen the journey into the other underworld of the goddess. And I would bet that Hellier season 3 is going to be either the joining of these two, divine masculine, divine feminine, or the return to the surface of the divine feminine. That's going to be my bet for Hellier season 3, is it's going to be one of those two. I'm leaning more towards the joining of the feminine and the masculine before the return. And it's just, this is the exact, like, now that I'm seeing the archetypes and the storyline laid out, and I know, like, my knowledge of myths knows where this is likely headed, then I can take that and I can look at my own life. And this is what I want to do today, is look at the upcoming astrology, look at the upcoming aspects to these myths. You know, what is next in the story? What is the next step? And what's that going to look like for me? And what's it going to look like for the world? Because, like, it's as above, so below. Like, that's literally all it is. This is a very long-winded way to explain to someone that this is as above, so below. So now, like, you get to watch these stories come out, and you get to participate in them also. But if you have enough knowledge, essentially, it's like having a prophecy kind of thing. And you know what factors might be influenced and what might be, you know, not stuck, but, like, unchangeable. And from what I understand, when the feminine goes to return to the surface, there is chaos. There is divine retribution. And this is something that I've had a feeling about for a while now, and that other people I've talked to have as well. You know, something big is coming. And I mean, it doesn't take an oracle to see that. You know, with global warming, with the economy, with the, you know, there's not enough steel to sustain the population. There's not enough cars. I was just talking to a mechanic the other day, and he said the number of electronic vehicles that are coming in, our electrical grid is not prepared for it, because they're drawing so, like, you're changing one power source to another, right? Whereas before, electricity primarily was for housing and buildings and everything, and now you're also running your cars on it. There's not enough infrastructure to support that. We are seeing the Bronze Age collapse again. And just knowing what I know from history, knowing what I know from insight and intuition, knowing what I know from myth, this is going to be the chaotic climax kind of thing before we return to the surface. And it's coming, and we're seeing it in the paranormal, so we know it's coming. And it's just going to be interesting as to how it goes, because you can't stop it. You can't close the book. Like, you can't be in, like, the ascending action and then slam the book shut and be like, never mind, I don't know. Like, we're not going to finish that story. That story continues to go on and will continue to go on, and we're along for the ride and creating it. And it's interesting to me that this re-enchantment is occurring at this time of this ascending action, because we are being set up in a way for some sort of cosmic battle, I guess is the best way to say it. Not battle in the sense of war, but a battle of paradigms, you know? And I mean, astrologically talking about this, you know, the age of Aquarius, you know, the disassembly of the patriarchy and a move towards more egalitarian society. You know, and we are also seeing, in a way, people are going to get after me for this possibly, but a swing with when it comes to polarization, that, Feminism is a good one because I think about it a lot. It started out great, pushing for things that we do need. And now there is a push in the opposite direction in terms of people are going to shit on me no matter what I say here. There is a feminization of the culture, and I don't mean that in an Alex Jones sense. I mean that in we were so deeply entrenched in toxic masculinity, and we are now shifting radically to something that is bordering on toxic femininity. And just seeing this in my own self, the feminine as an archetype is one of longing and sitting back and allowing something to come into being, which is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. Whereas masculine is action. And I think we can all agree that we're seeing this in regards to climate change, where there's a lot of people who just don't know what to do. They want it to be better, and they are sitting back and allowing whatever to happen while willing that it's going to be better. Manifestation is a great example of this. The feminine, I'm so stuck on that. The feminine urge meme. The feminine urge to request something and then sit back and allow it to manifest. That is manifestation. Order then wait. That is divine femininity. And it's not to say that that implies that the feminine is lazy. That's not what I mean. The feminine is sort of like your brain doesn't make things come into reality. Your hands do, if that makes sense. But your hands wouldn't make that reality without the brain generating that reality and seeing it and visualizing it first. That is what I'm saying. And in this metaphor, the feminine is the brain. It is the idea generation. But idea without action is just imagination. And we need that action. So right now, what I'm feeling that we're seeing is this learning curve of humanity, of how do we embody both the feminine and the masculine without veering too far to one side. And so that's not to say, I hate feminists, whatever. There's aspects to it that are very needed right now, and we still have work to do in those regards. It's just, how do we embody both in a healthy manner? How does a masculine man embody masculinity without becoming toxic, without stepping on the toes of the feminine? And I mean, that's, if you get into tantric philosophy, that's a great example of it. And I do feel that society as a whole has a rough understanding, mythologically speaking, of what needs to happen in terms of bringing more femininity in. But they're seeing the steps written out, and they're stopping at step 2 and not actually reading, okay, what do we need to do for the rest of the steps to complete this cycle? And so I think that this is also going to give us some issues, because we're going to have people living in their heads, which we already do, not embodied. And that balance, but that's the thing, is in new age circles, we are seeing a very gradual push towards that balance. So this isn't to be catastrophic in my thinking, saying that we're all just going to long for a better world and not change it. I think this climax is what's, sorry, I'll try and explain that after. This climax is what's going to force us to balance the feminine and the masculine. The reason I laughed at climax, I mean, obviously, besides the word climax, I am a 12-year-old boy, leave me alone. It's this societal climax is a literal metaphor for sexual climax, of how do you create balance for both partners, and for both aspects of society and of humanity. And we're seeing this in a mythological perspective with the Unbinding. We're literally, I keep hitting my mic. We're literally unbinding the feminine right now. And that ritual that they did, I expect that to see ripples in the next year or two. So now that we've unbound the feminine and we've already embodied the masculine, how do we bring them together and mesh them? And what does that look like on a mythological paranormal scale? What does that look like on a societal scale? What does that look like on a personal level? And yeah, it's a very exciting prospect to me to see where this is going. And I think we're going to know roughly where it's going based on things that are almost sort of a litmus test of this paranormal consciousness, like the Newkirks are doing. You know, like the stories that are coming out. Barbie coming out during Venus retrograde. Like the perfect analogy. You know, the number of women who, during Venus retrograde, the number of women who broke up with their boyfriends based on how their boyfriends responded to them responding to the Barbie movie. I can't count the number of stories I've heard of like women who were crying during the Barbie movie and their boyfriend is like, well, why are you crying? Like, what does it matter? It's just a dumb movie. And like that being like the generative force for them separating. And I heard something the other day that like asking a man what they thought of the Barbie movie is going to be the new litmus test for online dating. And like that's such a Venus retrograde theme. Because it's no longer tolerating the toxic masculinity. It's calling it out and really embodying that divine femininity, both in terms of like the light aspects and the dark aspects. You know, breaking up with your boyfriend over the Barbie movie is like peak Callie, like in my mind. Like it is a peak modern iteration and expression of Callie, is like this destructive force because the feminine is not being respected in the way that she longs for. And yeah, it's a very interesting time to witness this, but also to sit back and observe the layers of mythology that are taking place in front of our very eyes, that are reflective of the ancient mythologies, that are creating re-enchantment with mythology, that are bringing back the gods in a way, which like that style of spirituality is almost inherently divinely feminine also, because it is intuitive and it is not logic based. It's intuitive. But logic is in like an inherently masculine concept, at least characterized by like the masculine society within which we live and the lack of space there is for intuitive stuff. And I think those of us who are intuitive, who would be lobotomized in 1945, I think we're now like, forget hot girl summer, it's rat girl summer. Like that right there, it's peak. I know I keep saying peak, I'm sorry. It's peak dark feminine. And I think that's where we're headed. Like before we come back to the light feminine, it's going to be the dark feminine. And that's where we're headed with everything. And that's the journey into the underworld. But we're going to come back out of it and ideally, hopefully, balance the masculine and the feminine. Yeah. That's I don't know if that makes sense to anybody. Honestly, like this is how my brain works, is like these circuitous layers of thought and metaphor. And this podcast is simultaneously a great way to get it out because I think a lot about this stuff and I don't say it. But it's also terrifying to actually verbalize it and put it into a space where it can be viewed. Because I know some people are scared of this. And the fact that people who know me, who might be scared of this, are going to see this and then subsequently be scared of me in some aspects, that's terrifying. But like putting it out there is peak Callie. We're not going to stop saying Peak Cali. I might make shirts. I might make shirts. Peak Cali. Peak Cali moment. I'm in my Cali era. Oh, I love that so much. Oh, okay. Anyway, watch my website for that shirt, because that might be the shirt that I make today. Anyway, yeah, that was a really long ramble, and if you didn't follow it and you got bored, too bad, so sad. I had fun. Highly recommend watching The Unbinding. You can, I don't know, Americans can get it on Amazon, Canadians can't. You can rent it on YouTube, Google Play. I don't know, check out Planet Weird's website. They've got it there. Not that the Newkirks are ever going to hear this, but thank you for being good storytellers, even if you are hucksters. I don't know yet. We'll find out, I guess. I mean, it'll eventually come out that you guys probably are hucksters, but does that negate the experiences you had? There's a good question. I kind of view them almost as like Ed and Lorraine Warren of the 21st century. Like, you know, there's some things that the Warrens did that I'm like, you know what, maybe, yeah, sure. But like they got so into making money that, you know, then hoaxing just became an easy way to make money. And so it's like, it's a big question of like, do we fall to the temptation, or do we, of money, or will they like stick with authentic storytelling and prioritize storytelling over money? And I think they will, because I think we're in the era for it. We're out of the toxic masculine money grubbing era, or moving out of it anyway, and moving into valuing other things. So I think that the Newkirks will move deeper into the story, and that's just my prediction. Those are the big bets. The big bets for 2024. Actually, I don't know when season 3 of Hellier is coming out. Like, eventually. When's season 3 of Pennyroyal coming out? That's actually what I want to know. Hellier is good. Pennyroyal's superior, in my opinion. But I think that's just because I like Nathan Isaac's way of telling stories better. Anyway, yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, pivotholistichealing.ca. Emails info@pivotholistichealing.ca. You can find me online. I'm on Facebook, Pivot Holistic Healing, Instagram as well, although I think there's dots in between each word. And then, yeah, if you want assistance in terms of, how do I say this without stepping on toes? If you or a loved one are experiencing ancient gods talking through you and did want it to stop or want some guidance, please reach out. I can assist with that. I can also do tarot readings. I help a lot with emotional trauma, and moving through emotional trauma through a traditional lens, kind of. I offer alternatives to the mainstream methods. Gotta be careful how you word these things. Yeah, I help animals and I help humans, and you can reach me at Pivot Holistic Healing to book a session. I also, if money is a constraint, I do free sessions. I do a couple free sessions a month. So fill out the form on my website, apply for it. You don't have to let me know any financial data. You just got to let me know what's going on, pretty much. And it's just a as time permits kind of deal. I have t-shirts on my website also. Most of them aren't pertaining to the paranormal, though I'm definitely making that in my Cali era shirt today. So watch for that. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed roaming the Weird West with me today. Well, it was more so the Weird East, because we talked about Kentucky. But yeah. So hopefully see you guys next time. Thank you for joining.